All right, so I want to talk to you about the loop. This is a loop part 2. And it has a drill in it. First drill we've got. And if you've come to this and you're a beginner and you haven't seen the video about the grip, then you have to go and watch that one. I couldn't reorder it on the page, so you should be watching the grip before this video about the loop. Now the loop is what makes the fly cast work. It's the line which we turn into this loop. It's into this U shape on its side. We turn it into this loop here, and this loop then unrolls through the air. Okay, and that's what then delivers the fly. So there are 2 parts to this loop. There's a rod leg. This is the rod's down here. This is the rod leg of the loop, and then there's the fly leg, and that's the bit that's pulling the fly along. This is how fly casting works, so it's really important, and it's really what you want to be looking at, especially as a beginner. You always want to be aware of it, but as a beginner, this is all you're really interested in, is forming loops. Now, the drill I'm going to show you, I know Lee starts with it before the triangle method. What really switched me onto it, I think, was Graham Hurd. I saw a video of him casting out the window, and he uses this, and I started using this quite some years ago now. And I realized, actually, I think now this is the best way to start somebody. And so what we're going to do, I'm going to stand side on, and I've got about 12 feet of line here. I'm elevated as well. I'm on top of a boat roof. You don't have to be. You could be on the ground, maybe just shorten the line up a little bit, maybe to 6 feet plus leader. And with this rod tip, I am just going to shake the rod tip from side to side. And as you can see, it forms waves that run down from the rod tip all the way down to the water down there. And these waves running down here under gravity. Now, if I start to move this rod tip further, these waves start to get bigger. There's still quite a few of them running down. And if I move that even a little bit more, or change the pace a little bit, I now get loops running along underneath the rod tip. And if I put a little pause in there, those loops straighten. Now, let's just do that again, okay? So I'm going to start here with the rod tip, shaking the rod tip, getting waves running down the fly line, and then I'm going to gradually increase this here. Now I've got less waves, but they're bigger. And now I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to put a pause in, and those waves is now going to turn into a loop, and the loop's going to unroll. And if I let that loop fully unroll before I come forward, I have a nice loop. Now they're upside down, and you might say, well, hang on, Paul, I'm not going to Australia for a couple of years. Why do I need upside down loops? But they're not just useful for down there. There's actually quite an advanced cast, because these inverted loops can be used to put the fly underneath trees. Or if you have a very heavy crab pattern, it will come underneath and pop up and then land very gently. Or if you had brambles behind you, you could make that and it will just pop the fly up and it won't hook the brambles. But we're getting diverted there. So let's just go back to this, shaking the rod tip to get these waves running down from the rod tip, and then we start to lengthen up the distance as rod tip moves. Now we've got waves that are now eventually turning into loop when you put a pause in there. Now the question is, what do you watch when you're doing this? And I think this is really important, because sometimes as coaches, we've come to realize that we think what we're looking at is not actually what you're looking at, and they should really be the same. So what you want to be doing is you want to be watching that loop form and unroll. So my eyes on this are watching that loop as it unrolls, okay? That's the first thing that we want to be watching. The second thing that we want to be watching, and this is why we have 2 eyes, of course, is we want to be watching the rod tip to make sure it's stationary as the loop is unrolling. Now, for some of you, that might be quite difficult without a bit of practice, because our eyes tend to go in one direction and not split up. So for you, you can, and that's me too, by the way, you can watch the rod tip, make sure it straightens, and out of the peripheral vision watch the loop, but then go back and watch that loop unrolling, and you can switch from one to the other. Okay, you kind of need both of those bits to be focusing on, because if your rod, because you really want that rod to stop and hold position while the loop is unrolling, it's just going to make things easier for you. All right, so let's go back through this. So rod tip up, put it up here at 45 degrees if you like, shaking the rod tip, lots of little waves coming down. Then I can move that rod tip a little bit longer. I've got fewer waves, but they're bigger, and I can just make a little bit more effort, a little bit longer tip path, and now I have loops underneath the rod tip. Okay, and make sure that you pause that rod tip as those loops are unrolling. Really excellent drill, and in my opinion that's how to start somebody off learning to fly cast, because everyone can do that. Almost everyone can do that. Okay, it's not that difficult. And you can see it, you can see what's happening. You can go from waves, and then you can go from wave to upside down loops, and then we have another part of that which allows us to bring the loop up in plane. But at this point I would now go to the next video, which is the triangle method. But do spend some time playing with that, and it's fun too. You know, you do this for long enough, you can go into a trance.